Waitresses of Reddit, what's the most awkward first date you had to witness firsthand? The date I saw started off great. I was playing in a band at a small club. There were about 30 people in the club. A couple who had been sitting close together in a corner booth disappeared together into one of the bathrooms. In between songs, when it was quiet in the club, the bartender yells, "They better not be in there fucking on my sink." The whole place turns and stares at the bathroom door, and as we're staring, the couple emerges, smiling at first. Then they look around, see everybody staring at him, and their faces turn a deep color of shame. They quickly paid their bill and left. That is fucking hilarious. That is fucking hilarious. Only if it's not on his sink. There was guy who would use the place I worked at as his go-to. Every time it's a different girl and every time it ends with angry, he'd butter them up and brag about himself and talks about how he is such a gentleman for treating them to classy place, and his gratitude they should let him fuck them. Every time the date walks away and we have to deal with a horny asshole who tries to get either pity sex or pity dessert from the female staff. At my place we had the opposite. A young in shape really handsome dude from Spain would be in 3 to 4 times a week with a new older woman. The women would be buying him everything and basically swooning over him. He'd always walk up to pay with a little smirk while she would be paying for everything. He did this for years. Sounds like a male escort. We all came to that conclusion as well. I dated a guy like this. Always broke, but my god he was charming. I used to pride myself on being so liberated that I never thought twice about paying for everything, and I do mean everything. He would mention that he was worried about paying his gas bill and I'd say, "Oh honey, how much do you need?" I thought it was awful that he kept getting fired from one entry-level job after another. How mean of that care home to fire him, just because he forgot to check on all the residents that one morning, and old Mrs. K was left lying on the floor in her own filth for 6 hours. How mean of that auto shop to hire him just because he didn't protect that brand new engine properly, and sand blew in and ruined it. Jesus, he must have put a spell on me, or something. But it wasn't just me. We'd be out with friends and someone would say they were going to this rock concert where the tickets were, say $80, and he'd look sad and say, "Oh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could afford to go." And someone would always say, "Hey, don't worry, I've got you covered." One day I said to him, because I was curious, "How did you afford to buy your car?" I knew he was always as poor as dirt, and he had this nice 2-year-old car. "Oh," he said, "when I left the Navy a couple of years ago, this woman, a friend of mine, said I needed wheels, and she gave it to me." And the penny dropped. This guy is a professional mooch. I was about 14 months away from buying him an upgrade if I stuck with him. I hear he's married to a pretty, much older, Latina chick, with her own 3-year-old. This explained to me why after I broke up with him, I kept getting pop-up ads on my laptop for hot single Latina girls. Damn, man maxed out charisma apparently. I'm simultaneously disgusted with him and secretly want him to teach me his terrible, underhanded tricks. Step 1. Be incredibly handsome. I worked as a barista at a coffee shop with a dishwashing sink that brought you face to face with whoever was sitting at the coffee bar across from you. For some reason, so many people chose this spot for their first dates, so I would have to wash dishes and pretend I wasn't literally on the date with them. One time a person I knew was on their first date with someone and chose that cursed seat across for the dishwashing sink. Because we knew each other, we chatted a little bit and then as if a partition raised between us, they began their date. But I still had dishes to do. So fucking uncomfortable. Don't break eye contact for the entire time they sit there while you're washing dishes. And meow every 5 minutes. Meow, do you know how hot that coffee is? Worked at a pub connected to a brewery in college. Dude comes in with a stunning woman, I mean she's absolutely gorgeous. Whole time they're sitting at the end of the bar, and you can hear the guy talking about how he has a room for them next door at the hotel in downtown. So they decide to go to the brewery next door, gonna pull a little dine and dash. They got over there and didn't realize we were on the same system, so he orders a couple of beers, and the bartender on the brewery side asks if he wants to add it to his tab. He looks over confused and says, "What tab? I've never been here." She prints off the restaurant bill plus his brewery tab. It's like $80 or so. He just blankly stares at the poor bartender, flies off the handle. The girl he was with ended up paying for it. They walked across the street into the hotel. He has already invited her up. She stalls until her Uber gets there and then just dipped out. Kinda funny, kinda awkward, but that's what you get for dine and dash. In what world does a dine and dash ever sound like a good idea, but especially when on a date? Especially when you are going to dash next door. Regardless of if the establishments are connected in any financial way. I have definitely texted other bartenders in the area to let them know if something sketchy is going on. Finding a dine and dasher in a bar next door would be really easy. It's just so fucking scummy. If you can't afford to go out to eat, drink, then don't go out to eat and drink. I get your point, but you could also read that as, if you're poor, don't be poor. I think it's more like, if you're poor, that sucks but you still can't steal beer. Not a first date, but when I first started bartending I had a woman who was very obviously stood up. She got there, ordered a drink, and would look around every once in a while. I saw her use her phone a couple times and her mood just got sadder until she finally put her phone upside down on the bar and ordered food an hour later. I wiped what I could off her bill, then paid the rest myself, told her it was on the house. In my career it's happened 2 more times, once with another woman and once with a guy. I did the same thing. Nothing sucks more than eating alone and defeated. That's really kind of you. Man, thank you. I got stood up and literally as soon as I put my card down to pay my bill, my date walked in. Drunk. Quickly said hi to me, then went over to the other side of the bar where he made out with another person. He then waddled over and asked me to join him on the other side of the bar. Like, no, you for sure dodged a bullet there, but Jesus Christ, that would be up there with the top weirdest things I'd have ever seen. The sheer audacity, lol. I later found out he works at the bar he invited me to. Lol, that guy has some balls. I used to work at a Mexican restaurant, and one year when I was working on Valentine's I was subject to one of the weirdest first dates ever. A couple walks in, she is dressed to the nines, like she's ready to hit up a club. He is dressed more casually, in jeans and a button down. Our hostess seats them, and when I go to greet them the man announces that this is their very first date. The lady looks less than impressed and gives a small smile, more like a grimace. They order drinks, and as I'm watching their table you can tell that the date is not going well. The guy is talking animatedly and the girl is glancing around like she'd rather be anywhere else. I head over to take their order and it's clear that I've interrupted something. The guy looks a little embarrassed and sad and the girl looks pissed off. He orders his meal and she flippantly orders something, seafood enchiladas, without really looking at the menu. She tosses her menu in my direction and sucks down the rest of her drink. Okay then. I deliver their food and go back behind the counter to continue rolling silverware and watching my tables. They dig in and the man seems to be enjoying his food, his date looks disgusted and is flicking bits of her dinner around the table, floor. I walk over to check in and see if she maybe wants to order something else. I get to the table to ask how everything is and she gets up, screams that her food is disgusting, and goes off about how shitty this date was. She started yelling at him about how he should have ordered for her, how dare he take her to such a low-class place, she was so done with this, blah blah blah. She shoves her plate away, gets up, and storms out of the restaurant. The dude is mortified. I tell him I'll be right back with the bill and would he like his food boxed up. This fucking guy shakes his head, pulls her plate towards him, and says nope, he's fine to continue eating the meals he's paid for. He stayed for the duration of his meal. I never did find out what happened to the lady. We talked about that incident for weeks after. Dude dodged a bullet there. Definitely. I'd say he handled it pretty well. Anytime I go out and get to eat 2 main meals I call it a win. Not a first date, but very awkward. Guy comes in with an escort and drops a good amount of money on booze at the bar. Then she leaves a few hours later, and he informs us that his wife is on her way to meet him for dinner and tips us an extra $200 to keep our mouths shut. Keeping it classy. We had a regular that would have drinks and appetizers with his girlfriend. She'd leave and his wife and kids would meet him for dinner. We had something similar. A dude used to come in every Saturday with his kids and wife, then one week he came in with his kids and a much younger girl. She's his new wife. How fucking lazy are you to decide going to 2 locations in one evening is just too much? Hey, they're being responsible and not driving while drunk. Not a waiter but a girl I met on a dating app a couple years back told me this guy, who she also met on said dating app, set a date at this weird unknown ghetto bar in our town, and while the place seemed bad, the guy seemed cool so she ended up going. She gets there early and sits down at the table. Guy isn't there yet. She notices there are 2 other girls, also alone and on their phone, sitting separately. As the time goes on, more and more single girls start walking in and sitting alone. At this point, the guy is late by 15 minutes. After 30 minutes, she stands up and asks one of the girls, "Sorry, are you waiting for Alex?" The girl surprisingly says yeah. Another one must have heard the conversation because she stood up and said, "Hey, I'm also waiting for Alex." Turns out Alex had managed to invite 12 girls at the same bar at the same time, clearly as a prank. They ended up all sitting together and chatting and having drinks. Apparently it was a great night and most of them kept in touch. 3 of them even went on vacation together in Europe. I'll always wonder if Alex, or whatever his real name was there to notice it all, or knows how his prank ended up turning. Edit. Words. Can't write for shit. Edit 2. Everyone saying Alex was the bar owner or the bartender. It most probably wasn't. This was an ancient old-timers bar where the owner, who's also the bartender, probably didn't own a cell phone, and where they had car and motorcycle meetups every summer. There was nothing hip about it. Maybe Alex was one of the girls, and she just wanted some girlfriends. Or Alex worked at the bar and was trying to stir up business. Edit. For people thinking this is a good idea, if you try this, people will figure it out, and nobody, even people who don't hate you for this, will ever try to plan a date at your bar again for fear people will think it's a setup. That was immediately where my mind went, too. That would be brilliant. Just fill your own bar with single girls who are looking to date. As John Taffer always says, you gotta work to get the girls at your bar and then the dudes naturally follow, and they're ready to spend cash. Cue Alex showing up 5 minutes later, with a dozen swords. I'm only going home with one girl tonight, so we're gonna have tryouts. I was a bartender at a local place that was somewhat close to the university, but far enough away that it was a hidden gem. We used to get first dates all the time, most of them were Tinder-esque. I remember one time specifically, this guy comes in and sits down at a table alone, and kept checking his watch. A watch? I wander over, greet him, and ask what he'd like to start off with to drink. I dunno, I'm meeting someone, is it rude to have a drink already before they get here? I smiled, asked if he was waiting for a date, he said yes, and I suggested a beer to sip on instead of a mixed drink. It might calm his nerves a bit, but won't get him inebriated too quickly so he could enjoy his date. He agreed, apologized profusely for bothering me, which he hadn't bothered me at all, and continued to wait. After about 20 minutes of him waiting, and him checking his watch every 5, I wandered over again and asked if he'd like to look at a food menu, perhaps munch on something while he waited. He declined, and glanced at his watch again. I made a comment about his watch and how I appreciated his use of analog technology, and he laughed nervously and said he didn't want to pull out or use his phone during his date, because he didn't want to seem disingenuous. How cute. Another 30 minutes passed, and my high-strung hopeful was still alone. I asked if he'd changed his mind about some food, and he merely shook his head, defeated. I'll just finish my beer and go. I'm sorry I wasted one of your tables. On his last swig of beer, a cute-looking girl walked in, eyeing the room, obviously looking for someone. Chelsea, over here. He started to stand, grin from ear to ear. The entrance was near my drink well, which I had just happened to be standing in. This night was particularly quiet, and the acoustics allow me to hear chitter-chatter in the entryway, curved ceilings. I look over to the girl after seeing my hopeful's eyes light up, and she had a disgusted look of, damn it, in her face. She rolled her eyes and made contact with mine, sighed, and said, are you fucking kidding me with this guy? Screwed on her fake smile, and immediately sat down, avoiding a half-hug attempt by my hopeful. The entire date felt forced. Every time I went to check on him, she was ordering another drink, and he was doing his best to try and pull conversation from this girl, who had her face in her phone the entire time. About an hour later, I watched the girl get up with her purse, announce that she had to use the restroom, and wandered away towards the restrooms. I immediately went over to my hopeful to ask how his date was going. I don't think she likes me, he trailed off. I gave him a pat on the shoulder, and said it looked to me like he was doing everything right. He smiled, thanked me, and I went back to my bar. The girl never came back. He footed her tab. $90 worth of drinks, his 2 beers were $8. He continued to come back as a regular, and I became his wingwoman. I eventually set up Mr. Hopeful with Ms. Lonely Heart. They're still together. Edit. Spelling edit too. I was not anticipating such an interest in Mr. Hopeful and Ms. Lonely Heart, but I will gladly tell what I know of their story. I'm at work currently, and I'd like to give the same amount of effort to put into their story, as I did initially, so I will definitely post when I get home a little later. Thank you all for the awards. I'd like to hear the story of Mr. Hopeful and Ms. Lonely Heart. Yeah, you can't just name drop her and leave it at that. Women are the best wingmen.